Warriors of Old Japan, Chapter 3, The Story of Yoshitsune. Read by Robyn Paterson. In Old Japan more than 700 years ago, a fierce war was raging between the two great clans, the Taira and the Minamoto, also called the Heike and the Genji. These two famous clans were always contesting together for political power and military supremacy, and the country was torn in two with the many bitter battles that were fought. Indeed, it may be said that the history of Japan for many years was the history of these two mighty martial families, sometimes the Minamoto and sometimes the Taira gaining the victory, or being beaten, as the case may be. But their swords knew no rest for a period of many years. At last, a strong and valiant general arose in the house of Minamoto. His name was Yoshitomo. At this time there were two aspirants for the imperial throne, and civil war was raging in the capital. One imperial candidate was supported by the Taira, the other by the Minamoto. Yoshitomo, though a Minamoto, sided at first with the Taira against the reigning emperor. But when he saw how cruel and relentless their chief Kiyomori was, he turned against him and called for all his followers to rally around the Minamoto standard and put down the Taira. But fate was against the gallant and doughty warrior Yoshitomo, and he suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of the Taira. He and his men, while fleeing from the vigilance of their enemies, were overtaken within the city gates and ruthlessly slaughtered by Kiyomori and his soldiers. Yoshitomo left behind him his beautiful young wife, Tokiwa Gozen, and 8 children to mourn his untimely death. 5 of the elder children were by a first wife. The third of these became Yoritomo, the first great shogun of Japan, while the 8th and youngest child was Ushiwaka, about whom this story is written. Ushiwaka and the hero Yoshitsune were one and the same person. Ushiwaka, young ox, he was so called because of his wonderful strength, was his name as a boy, and Yoshitsune was the name he took when he became of age. At the time of his father's death, Ushiwaka was a babe in the arms of his mother, Tokiwa Gozen, but his tender age could not have saved his life had he been found by his father's enemies. After the defeat they had inflicted on the rival clan, the Taira were all powerful for a time. The Minamoto clan were in dire straits and in danger of being exterminated now, for so fierce was Kiyomori's hatred against his enemies that when a Minamoto fell into his cruel hands he immediately put the captive to death. Realizing the great peril of the situation, Tokiwa Gozen, the widow of Yoshitomo, full of fear and anxiety for the safety of her little ones, quickly hid herself away in the country, taking with her Ushiwaka and her 2 other children. So successful was Tokiwa Gozen in concealing her hiding place that, though the Taira clan either killed or banished to faraway islands all the elder sons, relatives and partisans of the Minamoto chief, they could not discover the whereabouts of the mother and her children, notwithstanding the strict search Kiyomori had made. But, determined to have his will and angry at being thwarted by a woman, Kiyomori at last hit upon a plan which he felt sure would not fail to draw the wife of Yoshitomo from her hiding place. He gave orders that Sekiya, the mother of fair Tokiwa, should be seized and brought before him. He told her sternly that if she would reveal her daughter's hiding place, she would be treated well, but if she refused to do so, she would be tortured and put to death. When the old lady declared that she did not know where Tokiwa was, as in truth she did not, Kiyomori thrust her into a prison and had her treated cruelly day after day. Now, the reason why Kiyomori was so set on finding Tokiwa and her sons was that while Yoshitomo's heirs lived, he and his family could know no safety, for the strongest moral law in every Japanese heart was the old command, "A man may not live under the same heaven with the murderer of his father," and the Japanese warrior recked nothing of life or death, of home or love in obeying this, as he deemed, supreme commandment. Women, too, burned with the same zeal in avenging the wrongs of their fathers and husbands. Tokiwa Gozen, though hiding in the country, heard of what had befallen her mother, and great was her sorrow and distress. She sat down on the mats and moaned aloud, "It is wrong of me to let my poor innocent mother suffer to save myself and my children, but if I give myself up, Kiyomori will surely take my lord's sons and kill them. What shall I do? Oh, what shall I do?" Poor Tokiwa! Her heart was torn between her love for her mother and her love for her children. Her anxiety and distraction were pitiful to see. Finally, She decided it was impossible for her to remain still and silent under the circumstances. She could not endure the thought that her mother was suffering persecution while she had the power to prevent it. So, holding the infant Ushiwaka in her bosom under her kimono, she took his two elder brothers, one 7 and the other 5 years of age, by hand and started to the capital. There were no trains in those days, and all travel by ordinary people had to be done on foot. Daimios and great and important personages were carried in palanquins, and they could travel in comfort and state. Tokiwa could not hope to meet with kindness or hospitality on the way, for she was a Minamoto, and the Taira being all-powerful, it was death for anyone to harbor a Minamoto fugitive. So the obstacles that beset Tokiwa were great, but she was a samurai woman, and she quailed not at duty, however hard or stern that duty was. The greater the difficulties, the higher her courage rose to meet them, and at last she set out on her momentous and celebrated journey. It was winter time, and the snow lay on the ground and the wind blew piercingly cold and the roads were bad. What Tokiwa, a delicately nurtured woman, suffered from cold and fatigue, from loneliness and fear, from anxiety for her little children, from dread lest she should reach the capital too late to save her old mother who might die under the cruel treatment to which she was being subjected, or to be put to death by Kiyomori in his wrath, or finally, lest she should be seized by the Taira and her filial plan be frustrated before she could reach the capital. All of these must have been greater than any words can tell. Sometimes poor distressed Tokiwa sat down by the wayside to hush the wailing babe she carried in her arms, or to rest the two little boys, who, tired and faint and famished, clung to her robes, crying for their usual rice. On and on she went, soothing and consoling them as best she could, till at last she reached Kyoto, weary, footsore, and almost broken-hearted. But though she was well nigh overcome with physical exhaustion, yet her purpose never flagged. She went at once to the enemy's camp and asked to be admitted to the presence of General Kiyomori. When she was shown into the dread man's presence, she prostrated herself at his feet and said that she had come to give herself up, and to release her mother. "I am Tokiwa, the widow of Yoshitomo. I have come with my 3 children to beseech you to spare my mother's life and set her free. My poor old mother has done nothing wrong. I am guilty of hiding myself and the little ones, yet I pray humbly for your august forgiveness." She pleaded in such an agonizing way that Kiyomori, the Taira chieftain, was struck in admiration for her filial piety, a virtue more highly esteemed than any other in Japan. He felt sincerely sorry for Tokiwa in her woe, and her beauty and her tears melted his hard heart, and he promised to her that if she would become his wife, he would not only spare her mother's life, but her 3 children also. For the sake of saving her children's lives, the sad-hearted woman consented to Kiyomori's proposal. It must have been terrible for her to wed with her lord's enemy, the very man who had caused his death, but the thought that by doing so she saved the lives of her sons, who would one day surely arise to avenge their father's cruel death, must have been her consolation and her recompense for the sacrifice. Kiyomori showed himself kinder to Tokiwa than he had shown himself to anyone before, for he allowed her to keep the babe Ushiwaka by her side. The 2 elder boys he sent to a temple to be trained as acolytes under the tutelage of priests. By placing them out of the world in the seclusion of priesthood, Kiyomori felt that he would have little to fear from them when they attained manhood. How terribly and bitterly he was mistaken, we learn from history, for 2 of Yoritomo's sons, banished though they had been for years and years, arose like a rushing mighty whirlwind from obscurity of the monastery to avenge their father, and then wipe the Taira from the face of the earth. Time passed by, and when the little babe Ushiwaka at last reached the age of 7, Kiyomori likewise took him from his mother and sent him to the priests. The sorrow of Tokiwa, bereft of the last child of her beloved Yoshitomo, can be better imagined than described. But even in her golden captivity, Kiyomori had not been able to deprive her of one iota of the incomparable power of motherhood, that of influencing the life of her child to the end of his days. As the little fellow had lain in her arms night and day, as she crooned him to sleep and taught him to walk, she forever whispered the name of Minamoto Yoshitomo in his ear. At last, one day her patience was rewarded, and Ushiwaka lisped his father's name correctly. Then Tokiwa clasped him proudly to her breast, and wept tears of thankfulness and joy, and of sorrowing remembrance, for she could never even for a day banish Yoritomo from her mind. As Ushiwaka grew older and could understand better what she said, Tokiwa would whisper daily, "Remember thy father, Minamoto Yoshitomo. Grow strong and avenge his death, for he died at the hands of the Taira." And day after day she told him stories of his great and good father, of his martial prowess in battle, and of his great strength and wonderful wielding of the sword, and she bade her little son remember and be like his father. And the mother's words and tears, sown in long years of patience and bitter endurance, bore fruit beyond all she could have ever hoped or dreamed. So Ushiwaka was taken from his mother at the age of 7, and was sent to the Tokobo Monastery at Kuriyama to be trained as a monk. Even at that early age he showed great intelligence, read the sacred books with avidity, and surprised the priests by his diligence and quickness of memory. He was naturally a very high-spirited youth, and could brook no control and hatred to yield to others in anything whatsoever. As the years passed by and he grew older, he came to hear from his teachers and his friends how his father Yoshitomo and his clan the Minamoto had been overthrown by the Taira, and this filled him with such intense sorrow and bitterness that sleeping or waking he could never banish the subject from his mind. As he listened daily to these things, the words of his mother, which she had whispered in his ear as a child, now came throbbing back to his mind, and he understood their full meaning for the first time. In the lonely nights he felt her hot tears falling on his face, and heard her repeat as clear as a bell in the silence of the darkness, "Remember thy father, Minamoto Yoshitomo. Avenge his death, for he died at the hands of the Taira." At last one night the lad dreamed that his mother, beautiful and sad as he remembered her in the days of his childhood, came to his bedside, and she said to him, while the tears streamed down her face, "Avenge thy father, Yoshitomo. Unless thou remember my last words, I cannot rest in my grave. I am dying, Ushiwaka. Remember!" And Ushiwaka awoke as he cried aloud in his agony, "I will, honorable mother, I will!" From that night his heart burned from within him, and the fire and love of his clan race stirred in his soul. Continual brooding over the wrongs of his clan generated in his heart a fierce desire for revenge, and finally he resolved to abandon the priesthood, become a great general like his father, and punish the Taira. And as his ambition was fired and exalted, and his mind thrilled back to the days when his poor unhappy mother Tokiwa prayed and wept over him, daily whispering in his ear the name of his father, his will grew to purpose strong. Tokiwa had not suffered in vain. From this time on, Ushiwaka bided his every night until all the priests in the temple were asleep. When he heard the priest snoring, he knew that he was safe from observation. He would then steal out from the temple, and making his way down the hillside to the valley, he would draw his wooden sword and practice fencing by himself, and, striking the trees and stones, imagine they were his Taira foes. As he worked in this way night after night, he felt his muscles grow strong, and his practice taught him how to wield the sword with skill. One night as usual, Ushiwaka had gone to the valley, and was diligently brandishing about his wooden sword. His mind fully bent upon his self-taught lesson, he was marching up and down chanting snatches of war songs and striking the trees and rocks, when suddenly a great cloud spread out over the heavens, the rain fell and the thunder roared and the lightning flashed, and a great noise went through the valley, as if all the trees were being torn up by the roots and their trunks were splitting. While Ushiwaka wondered what this could mean, a great giant over 10 feet in height stood before him. He had large, round, glaring eyes that glinted like metal mirrors. His nose was bright red, and it must have been about a foot long. His hands were like the claws of a bird, and to each there were only 2 fingers. The feathers of long wings at each side peeped out under the creature's robes, and he looked like a gigantic goblin. Fearful indeed was this apparition. But Ushiwaka was a brave and spirited youth and the son of a soldier, and he was not daunted by anything. Without moving a muscle of his face, he gripped his sword tightly and simply said, "Who are you, sir?" The goblin laughed aloud and said, "I am the king of the Tengu, the elves of the mountains, and I have made this valley my home for many a long year. I have admired your perseverance in coming to this place night after night for the purpose of practicing fencing all by yourself, and I have come to meet you with the intention of teaching you all I know of the art of the sword." Ushiwaka was delighted when he heard this, for the Tengu have supernatural powers, and fortunate indeed are those whom they favor. He thanked the giant elf and expressed his readiness to begin at once. He whirled up his sword and began to attack the Tengu, but the elf shifted his position with the quickness of lightning, and taking from his belt a fan made of 7 feathers, parried the showering blows right and left, so cleverly that the young knight's interest became thoroughly aroused. Every night he came out for a lesson. He never missed once, summer or winter, and in this way he learned all the secrets of the art which the Tengu could teach him. The Tengu was a great master, and Ushiwaka was an apt pupil. He became so proficient in fencing that he could overcome 10 or 20 small Tengu in the twinkling of an eye, and he acquired extraordinary skill and dexterity in the use of the sword. And the Tengu also imparted to him the wonderful adroitness and agility which made him so famous in after life. Now Ushiwaka was a 15-year-old, and a comely youth and tall for his age. At this time there lived in Mount Hei, just outside the capital, a wild bonze named Musashi Bo Benkei, who was such a lawless and turbulent fellow that he had become notorious for his deeds of violence. This city rang with the story of his misdeeds, and so well known had he become that people could not hear his name without fear and trembling. Benkei suddenly made up his mind that it would be good sport to steal 1,000 swords from various knights. No sooner did the wild idea enter his head than he began to put it into practice. Every night he sauntered forth to the Gojo Bridge of Kyoto, and when a knight or any man carrying a sword passed by, Benkei would snatch the weapon from his girdle. If the owners yielded up their blades quietly, Benkei allowed them to pass unhurt, but if not, he would strike them dead with a single blow of the huge halberd he carried. So great was Benkei's strength that he always overcame his victim. Resistance was useless, and night by night 1 and sometimes 2 men met death at his hands on the Gojo Bridge. In this way Benkei gained a terrible reputation that everyone far and near feared to meet him, and after dark no one dared to pass near the bridge he was known to haunt. So fearful were the tales told of the dread robber of swords. At last his story reached the ears of Ushiwaka, and he said to himself, "What an interesting man this must be! If it is true he is a bonze, he must be a strange one indeed, but he only robs people of their swords, so he cannot be a common highwayman. If I could make such a strong man a retainer of mine, he would be of great assistance to me when I punish my enemies, the Taira clan. Good! Tonight I will go to Gojo Bridge, and I will test the mettle of this Benkei." Ushiwaka, being a youth of great courage, had no sooner made up his mind to beat Benkei than he proceeded to put his plan to execution. He started out that very evening. It was a beautiful moonlit night, and taking with him his favorite flute, he strolled through the streets of the sleeping city until he came to the Gojo Bridge. Then, from the opposite direction, came a tall figure which appeared to touch the clouds, so gigantic was its stature. The stranger was clad in a suit of coal-black armor, and carried an immense halberd. "This must be the sword robber. He is indeed strong," said Ushiwaka to himself, but he was not in the least daunted, and he went on playing his flute calmly. Presently the armed giant halted and gazed at Ushiwaka, but evidently thought him no more than a mere youth, and decided to let him go on unmolested, for he was about to let him pass without lifting a hand. This indifference on the part of Benkei not only disappointed but angered Ushiwaka. Having waited in vain for the stranger to offer violence, our hero approached Benkei, and, with the intention of picking a quarrel, suddenly kicked the latter's halberd out of his hand. Benkei, who had first thought to spare Ushiwaka on account of his youth, became very angry when he found himself insulted by a lad to whom he had been intentionally kind. In a fury he exclaimed, "Miserable stripling!" and raising his halberd struck sideways at Ushiwaka, thinking to slice him in 2 at the waist and see his body fall asunder. But the young knight nimbly avoided the blow which would have killed him, and springing back a few paces he flung his fan at Benkei's head and uttered a loud cry of defiance. The fan struck Benkei on the forehead right between the eyes, making him mad with pain. In a transport of rage Benkei aimed a fearful blow at Ushiwaka, as if he were splitting a log of wood with an axe. This time Ushiwaka sprang up to the parapet of the bridge, clapped his hands and laughed in derision, saying, "Here I am! Don't you see me? Here I am!" And Benkei was again thwarted thus. Benkei, who had never known his strokes to miss before, had now failed twice in catching this nimble opponent. Frantic with chagrin and baffled with rage, he now rushed furiously to the attack, whirling his great halberd around in all directions until it looked like a water wheel in motion, striking wildly and blindly at Ushiwaka. But the young knight had been taught tricks innumerable by the giant Tengu of Kuramayama, and he had profited so well by his lessons that the King Tengu had at last said that even he could teach him nothing more. And now, as it may be well imagined, he was too quick for the heavy Benkei. When Benkei struck in front, Ushiwaka was behind. And when Benkei aimed a blow behind, Ushiwaka darted in front. Nimble as a monkey and swift as a swallow, Ushiwaka avoided all the blows aimed at him, and, finding himself outmatched, even the redoubtable Benkei grew tired. Ushiwaka saw that Benkei was played out. He kept up the game a little longer, and then he changed his tactics. Seizing his opportunity, he knocked Benkei's halberd out of his hand. When the giant stooped to pick the weapon up, Ushiwaka ran behind him and with a quick movement tripped him up. There lay the big man on all fours, while Ushiwaka nimbly strode across his back, and pressing down asked him how he liked this kind of play. All this time Benkei had wondered at the courage of the youth in attacking and challenging a man so much larger than himself, but he was filled with amazement at Ushiwaka's wonderful strength and adroitness. "I am indeed astonished at what you have done," said Benkei. "Who in the world can you be? I have fought with many men in this bridge, but you are the first of my antagonists who displayed such strength. Are you a god? Are you a Tengu? You certainly cannot be an ordinary human being." Ushiwaka laughed and said, "Are you afraid for the first time, then?" "I am," answered Benkei. "Will you henceforth be my retainer?" demanded Ushiwaka. "I will in very truth be your retainer, but may I know who you are?" asked Benkei meekly. Ushiwaka now felt certain that Benkei was in earnest. He therefore allowed him to get up from the ground and said, "I have nothing to hide from you. I am the youngest son of Minamoto Yoshitomo, and my name is Ushiwaka." Benkei started with surprise when he heard these words and said, "What is this I hear? Are you in truth the son of Lord Yoshitomo of the Minamoto clan? That is the reason I felt from the first moment of our encounter that your deeds were not those of a common person. No wonder I thought this. I am only too happy to become the retainer to such a distinguished and spirited young knight. I will follow you as my lord and master from this very moment if you will allow me. I can wish for no greater honor." So there and then, on the Gojo Bridge in the silver moonlight, the bonds Benkei vowed to be the true and faithful vassal of the young knight Ushiwaka, and to serve him loyally till death, and thus the compact between lord and vassal was made. From that time on, Benkei gave up his wild and lawless ways, and devoted his life to the service of Ushiwaka, who was highly pleased at having won such a strong liegeman to his side. Although Ushiwaka had now secured Benkei, it was impossible for only two men, however strong, to think of fighting the Taira clan, so they both decided that the cherished plan must wait until the Minamoto were stronger. While they were thus waiting, they heard a report to the effect that a descendant of Tawara Toda Hidesato, named Hidehira, was now a famous general in Kauai of the Ashu province, and that he was so powerful that no one dared oppose him. Hearing this, Ushiwaka thought that it would be a good plan to pay the general a visit and try to interest him, if possible, in the fortunes of the house of Minamoto. He consulted with Benkei, who encouraged the young knight in his scheme of enlisting the General Hidehira as a partisan, and the two therefore left Kyoto secretly and journeyed as quickly as possible to Oshu on this errand. On the way there, Ushiwaka and Benkei came to the temple of Atsuda, and they considered it important that the young knight should look older now. Ushiwaka performed the rite of Gembuku at the shrine. This rite was performed in olden times when youths had reached the age of manhood. They had to shave off the front part of their hair and change their names as a sign that they had left childhood behind. Ushiwaka now took the name of Yoshitsune. As he was the eighth son, it would have been more correct for him to have assumed the name of Hachiro, but his uncle Tametomo the archer, of whom you have already read, was named Tachiro, and he purposely did not take this name. From this time forward, our hero is known as Yoshitsune, and his name has been glorified forever by his wonderful bravery and many heroic exploits. In Japanese history, he is the knight without fear and without reproach, and darling of the people, to them almost an incarnation of Hachiman, the popular god of war. And as for Benkei, never can you find in all history a vassal who is more true or loyal to his master than Benkei. He was Yoshitsune's right hand in everything, and his strength and wisdom carried them successfully through many a dire emergency. From Kyoto to Oshu is a long journey of about 300 miles. But at length Yoshitsune, as we must now call him, and Benkei reached their destination and craved the General Hidehira's assistance. They found that Hidehira was a warm adherent of the Minamoto cause, and under the late Lord Yoshitomo he and his family had enjoyed great favor. When the general learned, therefore, that Yoshitsune was the son of the illustrious Minamoto chief, his joy knew no bounds, and he made Yoshitsune and Benkei heartily welcome and treated them as guests of honor and importance. Just at this time, Yoshitsune's elder brother Yoritomo, who had been banished to an island in Izu, collected a great army and raised his standard against the Taira. When the news about Yoritomo reached Yoshitsune, he rejoiced, for he felt that the hour had at last come when the Minamoto would be revenged on the Taira for all the wrongs they had suffered at the hands of the latter. With the help of Hidehira and the faithful Benkei, he collected a small army of warriors and at once marched over to his brother's camp in Izu. He sent a messenger ahead to inform Yoritomo that his younger brother, now named Yoshitsune, was coming to aid him in his fight against the Taira. Yoritomo was exceedingly glad at this unexpected good news, for all that helped to swell his forces now brought near the day when he would be able to strike his long-planned blow at the power of the hated Taira. As soon as Yoshitsune reached Izu, Yoritomo arranged for an immediate meeting. Although the two men were brothers, it must be remembered that their father had been killed and their family utterly scattered when they were mere children, Yoshitsune being at the time an infant in his mother's arms. As this was therefore the first time they had met, Yoritomo knew nothing of his younger brother's character. One of Yoshitsune's elder brothers had come with him, and Yoritomo, being a shrewd general, wished to test them both to see of what metal they were made. He ordered his retainers to bring a brass basin full of boiling water. When it was brought, Yoritomo ordered Noriyori, the elder of the two, to carry it to him first. Now brass being a good conductor of heat, the basin was very hot, and Noriyori stupidly let it fall. Yoritomo ordered for it to be filled again, and bade Yoshitsune to bring it to him. Without moving a muscle of its handsome face, Yoshitsune took hold of the almost unbearably hot vessel and carried it with due ceremony slowly across the room. This exhibition of nerve and endurance filled Yoritomo with admiration, and he was favorably struck with Yoshitsune's character. As for Noriyori, who had been unable to hold the hot basin for but a few moments, he had no use for him at all, except as a common soldier. Yoritomo begged Yoshitsune to become his right-hand man, and zealously to espouse his cause. Yoshitsune declared that this had been his lifelong ambition ever since he could remember, as they were both the sons of the same father, so their cause and destiny was one. Yoritomo made Yoshitsune a general part of his army, and ordered him in the name of their father Yoritomo to chastise the Taira. Delighted beyond all words at the wonderful auspicious turn events were taking, Yoshitsune hastened his preparations for the march. The longed-for hour had come which through his whole childhood and youth he had looked forward to, and for which his whole being had been thirsting for many years. He could now fulfill the last words of his unhappy mother, and punish the Taira for the evil they had wrought against the Minamoto. All the wild restlessness of his youth, which had driven him forth to wield his wooden sword against the rocks of Kurumayama Valley, and to try his strength against Benkei on the Gojo Bridge, now found vent in action most dear to a born warrior's heart. With several thousands of troops under him, Yoshitsune marched up to Kyoto and waged war against the Taira, and defeated them in a series of brilliant engagements. The stricken Taira multitudes fled before the avenger like autumn leaves before the blast, and Yoshitsune pursued them to the sea. At Dan no Ura the Taira made a last stand, but all in vain. Their lion leader, Kiyomori, was dead, and there was no great chieftain to rally them in the disordered retreat that now ensued. Yoshitsune came sweeping down upon them, and they and their fleet and their infant emperor likewise, with their women and children, sank beneath the waves. Only a scattered few lived to tell the tale of the terrible destruction that overtook them on the sea. Thus did Yoshitsune become a great warrior and general. Thus did he fulfill the ambitions of his youth and avenge his father, Yoshitomo's death. He was without a rival in the whole country, for his marvelous bravery and successive victories. He was adored by the people as their most popular hero and darling, and throughout the length and breadth of the land his praise was sung by everyone. Even to this day, there is no one in Japan who has not heard the name of Yoshitsune. The next story, the story of Benkei, will tell you more of Yoshitsune, For the two lives are linked together in the danger and glory of noble deeds done, of dangers past, of troubles and reverses borne, and of honors earned and joys and victories shared together, to be told and remembered forever.